Travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shifts. What's your scary story? Salvadoran guy here. About a year ago, I moved to the capital city alone to study, and I met some friends in the first months here. I went to the beach about 3 or 4 times before this incident. I'll give you context. I have a 2011 Corolla, which isn't a fast car, and sometimes I get stranded in the street. The beach is like 20 miles away. The highway isn't in the best condition, but even with this country being as dangerous as it is, this road is really safe. Well, we packed our things and getting on the road. It was about the half of the way, 10:30 p.m., and I saw a car next to the road may have had a flat tire. I think twice before helping, because vehicle theft is known in this way, but I helped them. I stopped and saw this bearded fat guy, about 30 or 35 years old. He is obviously drunk, and he tells me that he has a flat tire, that he cannot change it by himself. He tells me his friends do not know that he left the beach, he needs to go home, and that his spare tire is in the back of the car. He accompanies me to open it, and before I know it, he hits me very hard on the head. The blow pushes me towards the street and another man appears out of the bushes with a naked torso and a machete. I move around the car and quickly analyze the situation. None of my friends know that I stopped on the street. My phone is in the car. I'm completely incommunicado. Both men are very drunk, but I'm afraid that they could still attack me as I'm completely helpless. I start walking around the car, with them watching me and trying to surround me. When I have a clear view of my car and the bearded man is on that side, I run like a cheetah towards and start it as fast as I can to shoot off down the road. I hear a shot, but I have no intention of looking back. I call the police and as expected, they just tell me not to walk through the area at that time, because there were similar calls that week. I didn't travel alone in that area again, but unfortunately I can't stop helping good travelers. I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed in a notation that said, "Native village reported in the area." There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much more of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back into the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat in the bridge with the door open because I like the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing lights splashing in the water and went out to sea because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went into the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people to a canoe and all just sitting and watching us. Occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I have never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deckhand up and we both just walked around the decks to show that people were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night, completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning they came in and traded with us and were very friendly and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. I don't really know if it qualifies as scary, but I remember getting hit from behind by something while I was stopped in the middle of an intersection in the middle of the night last year. To this day, I don't really know what it was. I even saw the traffic cam footage and saw nothing. All I saw was me being stopped completely in the middle of the road waiting for a car in front of me to pass by so I can cross when my car shook like something had hit it from behind, and a minute or so later, it showed me parking to the side to check what had happened. The accident didn't leave any dents nor scratches, but it had enough impact to disallowance my bumper. I've actively tried to avoid that road since. I came back into my camp from cooking/cleaning/taking a dump and found an individual digging around in my tent and gear. I quietly watched the person from a bit away while they rummaged around, eventually leaving while taking nothing. Packed up all my shit and hiked through in the dark. There's zero good things that could come from someone else looking through your gear in the middle of the woods as nighttime approaches. Don't know what they wanted, don't want to find out. I worked at a movie theater and most often worked the closing shift. One night me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after, the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my co-worker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me in the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later, one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I asked her what she meant and she asked me why we had dumped all of the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all of the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place too. Once I was working in a restaurant and got done at around 12ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along a bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight, but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of it lit up by street lights, so without my front bicycle light I would be totally blind for the most part. So this one night I leave OMW home after the shift and I notice a guy is biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy but very safe city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exit, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of the night is getting to me. So I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minimum away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home, just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood and he's still behind me. What I then did is I noticed I was heading straight for a long small dark path only for bicycles. I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard this person pass the house and brake quickly in that small path. At this moment my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike and when I passed the edge of that street I stopped and stared that person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hoped he thought, cause I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. I used to have a buddy that lived in the same neighborhood a few streets over. One night we were having a couple of beers in his backyard while playing cards. I had some things to do the next morning, so just before 10 I said my goodbyes and shoved off. It was a short walk, maybe 15 minutes door to door, so I never drove. Anyway, it was a nice night. Uneventful trip, but when I got home, my roommate was coming out the front door, coffee in hand, and dressed for work. He gave me a funny look and said he thought I was asleep since my truck was in the driveway. I told him where I'd been and asked why he was going into work at night. That's when he kind of laughed and asked if I was drunk. We stared at each other for a minute and then he told me it was just after 5 in the morning and he was going in just like he usually did. In my entire life, I'd never felt more confused than I did in that moment. I could tell he was dead serious, but I knew I had just left my friend's house. I checked my phone and sure enough, 5 something in the AM, my roommate left for work. I paced circles in the living room for a bit, then called the friend whose house I'd just left. He groggily answered and confirmed I'd left at 10 the previous evening. I have no idea what happened during those 7 hours of my life, and it gives me chills to think about it all these years later. I wasn't drunk, I wasn't tired, no one could have slipped anything in either of the two cause lights I'd had. No known medical conditions that would have caused me to black out, and nothing has happened like it since. I just don't know what happened to that time. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we behind and Sav on the road. We were behind them for a good while when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavy. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the Sav called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. Thanks for watching, and share your stories. Don't forget to consider the idea to maybe think about potentially subscribing. Peace.